Good afternoon, and welcome. Today we're talking about naming the people in your estate plan, and I'm going to start off with a few questions. First, who are you leaving a legacy for? Who is going to manage that legacy? Who is going to carry out those instructions for you? Who can you count on to do that? Why is this important? Why does this matter? Oh, it's not a big deal. I'll get to it when I get to it. Okay, you may be thinking that now, but let me tell you, the more thought and the more you ask yourself about this now, before the problems present themselves, the better off you will be to, first of all, prevent these problems from ever happening, right? But number two, to also reduce any damage that can come out of some confusion or conflict when it comes to these very delicate issues. So we're going to be talking about this in today's video. Why you need to name names. Okay. Naming the people in your estate plan, it matters a lot. So let's talk about some of the consequences that can happen if you don't do that. And then we'll get to three of the most important kind of factors when it comes to naming people in the plan. So first, why does it matter, right? How we're getting to these questions. Why does it matter? Does it really matter? Yes. Okay. And for these reasons, first of all, if you don't have any plan, if you don't have any kind of documentation in place, if you don't have any names listed, it's going to become public. Okay. And we know how it gets when we hear about lottery winners, right? They won the $1 million ticket. And then we hear the stories of how they have just cousins and all these things coming out of the woodwork, right? Because they're trying to collect some money, right? They know you now. They're close to something now. Well, when it comes to estate planning, if you don't have any documentation in place, and you don't have any kind of boundaries about how to manage it or who's going to do what, it will go to probate court, and court is always public. Okay, it's a matter of public record. So that means your assets, your net worth, right? How much you have, all of that stuff can become public record. And what can that produce? Conflict, right? Bad blood in the family. You can have children fighting against each other. You can have an aunt fighting a nephew, right? You can have sisters and siblings fighting among each other. I'm talking about grown adults too, And I'm not talking about grown adults like 40s, 50s. I'm talking about 60s, 70s, 80s. All of this happens because people are still people. We're going to have conflict. And when there are no clear rules, people make their own rules. Okay. So this can lead into a nasty court battle. And the more you have, the more conflict there's going to be there. There are two different quotes that can remind me of this. And one is biblical, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. Okay. And that's number one. But then another one is a little bit more street poetic, which is more money, more problems, right? From the Notorious B.I.G. So the whole point is, though, the more you have, the more responsibility is going to be there. And the more problems are going to come along with that because people are going to see that you have more, that you're able to manage more. And maybe they don't have that. And so it's quicker for them to maybe try to get some of that from you than to try to do it themselves. Okay. So that's the whole point of the matter. So it's going to produce public court battles, bad blood in the family, because now you have blood relatives fighting against one another. You might have children fighting against their parents, right? Or parents fighting against their children, siblings fighting against each other, kids fighting, each other over parents' things. I mean, it's very common. It really is. And I counsel my clients about this a lot. Like, listen, I know how you feel. I know you might even be embarrassed and have some shame about it. But this happens so often. It really does. And I'm not trying to normalize that because I don't want to see anybody fighting in that context, especially over some stuff, right? When it all comes down to it. But just know that you're not alone if this is happening to you, okay? And the reluctance to talk about money and property really does fuel these lack of decisions, I would say. It's why we don't have the family sit down about who's going to get what, how much mom and dad have, how much, so-and-so can have this XYZ, because it's still so taboo around it. I was at a church meeting recently, and this church is putting on an event for, it's called kind of like Dying with Dignity. Okay. But they made it very clear. We're not talking about wills. We're not talking about trust. We're not talking about money and property. We're just talking about like having these relationships and having these kinds of conversations with your family at the end of life. And, this is what I do professionally, but my sensors kind of went off because I'm like, okay, you can talk to people all you want, but what are you going to be talking about? They want to know where the money in the property is, right? They want to know if there is a will. They want to know if there's a trust. They want some kind of guidelines. And it might not be because they're trying to get to money in the property, but because somebody still has to manage it. Somebody still has to handle it. So this reluctance, like this guilt that we have about talking about things that we've acquired, and that if we're any good parent, we want to pass on to our children so that they don't have to start from scratch, not so that they can be spoiled and not have to work, but so that they don't have to start and take the hard way that we did, right? So the reluctance to talk about these issues really fuels so much of the problem. So today we're here to talk about it. We are here to talk about it. And it starts with first making the decision to have these kinds of discussions. That's number one, period. And the people in your life are often going to be the people in your plan. So that's why we're starting with these people and naming them, and why it's so important to be specific in naming exactly who it is. Okay, for these three key reasons. So after we get over the fact of we're going to have these conversations, right? We're going to make the decision to be the person that has these discussions. Now we're getting into the three key reasons of why that is so important when it comes to naming names in our estate plan. And the first is when it comes to our policies. Our policies. And when I say our policies, I'm talking about primarily our money policies, life insurance, right? If we have any other kind of insurance that we can collect on, our retirement accounts, we'll get into that in a little bit, but anything where we basically contracted for that. If something happened to us, XYZ, this person I have, they would get the money. You have to name those people. All right. And I'm not, and don't be like all my children. No, name this specific child. Okay. My oldest son, Junior. If he is no longer alive, then, my daughter, Mary. Be very specific in naming these people because the company is going by the policy. If there is nobody listed, you can potentially have that policy go into the probate court process, which is going to take months, to resolve. And then it's going to delay getting those funds right away, as opposed to, having a very clear policy, knowing who it is, having that individual named and they know who it is, and then they just take the death certificate to the company and get the funds. That's why you got the policy in the first place, right? So why are you not naming who you want it to go to? You can't collect on a death policy, on an insurance policy, because you're alive, right? So where is it going to go? You need to be the person to make that decision and make that instruction very clear and very plain. And I'll give you an example about this, where a client had lost parents tragically, right, at the same time, and that can even make it more difficult. And there was a life insurance policy, but there was no beneficiary listed. Now, when this happens, the company will not tell you anything. Even if you have a beneficiary listed, but you don't have like a probate case open, they don't have anyone they can talk to about that. Okay, so sometimes they'll even make you go to probate for that. But especially when it comes to no beneficiary, they're not talking to you. They're not going to let you know who it is. The only time they really talk is if you know exactly who it is. You have the policy in front of you and like they can correct it in that way. But they're not going to give you that information because it was between them and the person that passed away. Person passed away, died, so they don't have anybody else to talk to. So anyway, the client had one of her parents did have a life insurance policy. There was no beneficiary listed, so probate case had to be opened up in court. And this was back in the heyday of COVID. So like I'm talking about, it took 2 months just to get one update on a filing. It took so long. Okay. And it's still not really, it was already slow. It was already not well digitized. So it was just that much more delay. And first of all, getting the case open. So that she can prove that, I am an heir and now I'm managing this estate and I want to know who's on the policy, right? If there's a policy so that they can get the money. But that took 5 months to do. Okay, that took 5 months to do. And then there was just back and forth with the life insurance company. Finally, we got the paperwork settled. I stepped up. I'm like, hey, listen, this is what it is. This is the paperwork. Here you go. Within a week, the money was distributed. Okay. But it took 5 months before that. as opposed to, if the name was already there, listed clearly, the person whose name was listed, they knew, so that they would have their evidence, their identification, they would have death certificate. All they had to do was just go collect. That could have been done in a week. All right. But because we kind of avoid these conversations, or we just kind of check the box, oh, I got the policy, but then don't do any deeper digging and research into actually making sure we have the correct beneficiary on there, it just gets lost in the weeds. Okay. So that's why it's very important. And also, on kind of the flip side, if you do have somebody listed like a spouse, but you're no longer a spouse, make sure you change that name right away. Because again, the insurance policy, the company, they're going by the contract, not necessarily by your divorce decree, not necessarily by, the state statutes, the state laws that kind of automatically disinherit an ex-spouse. If they're still on that policy, they could potentially still collect because their name is the one still listed there. So that's why it's very important to name names and make sure it's the right name, right? Okay, so that's policies. Kind of the same kind of goes with like retirement accounts. And then aside from money policies, just your own kind of personal policy. So for instance, if you've created a trust, what are your policies? Your own policies to collect on the money. If you don't want to have a so-called trust fund, baby, but you do want to make sure that your child is well educated, they go to college, maybe they have proven that they can take care of themselves before they handle more money. That's your policy. You name that in there. You name the name of who you want to do that and who you want to do it for and why. Okay. So policies are very important when it comes to naming names. Excuse me. The second one is property. And we know how this goes. Okay, the first one is the house. If there's anything somebody's going to fight over, it is the house. Okay, and if you have multiple houses, it can be all of that. The residential house that you raise the family in, the investment properties, maybe it's a commercial property, right? Name the names. Who's going to take over? If you get some deed work done so they can take over automatically, make sure that's straightened out. If you're leaving the house in trust, make sure you're have very clear instructions about who's entitled to the property, or who's entitled to benefit from it. If you don't, and you just leave a will, even if you just leave a will, right? You don't do anything further than that. Make sure it's very clearly stated who it is, and name the names. Not just and sometimes I do intentionally leave things vague because people want to provide for like grandchildren that they may not have yet, so they can say something like to my son and any grandchildren I may have, so then the grandchildren are included. But if you know for sure you only want the one person, only name them. Even if you have 3 children and you want to only leave the property to one child because you know that one child is the most responsible and will take care of it and will do what's best with it, only name the one. And don't feel guilty about it. Be responsible, right? And pass it on to the next line, the next generation who will be responsible for it. So name the names very clearly on the home. Name the names in the bank accounts. Bank accounts are a lot like the life insurance policies. If you don't have a beneficiary on there, the assets, the money that's in there can go to probate court. Name names and make sure that people know who is listed as the beneficiary. Another story that happened recently within the last year or so, a client husband passed away. He had been sick, but then when he passed, it was very sudden. It was within a couple of hours that I had spoken with them. And husband had a bank account on his own. They had been married to spouse for decades, and they shared everything, but they did also have their own personal accounts. And he had a personal account, about $80,000 in there. Wife knew that, but they didn't know who the beneficiary was. They knew somebody was listed, knew it was probably wife, but didn't know for sure. And so the bank or a credit union would not release that information. Okay. They had been trying to get that sorted even before he passed away. They refused because the name wasn't listed. Name names. And because of that, that $80,000 was locked away for a period of time. Imagine what you can do with $80,000. Okay, especially as a grieving spouse, you still have maybe car payments to pay. You might still have a mortgage to pay. If you have any minor children, you might have obviously grocery bills for them, gas and driving them to their activities, tuition. There's a lot you can do with that, but you can't do anything with it if it's locked away because you didn't name the name for who's supposed to get it, and they don't know that they're the person. Okay, so that's why that's so important. Same thing with cars. Any kind of property where you can specifically transfer to somebody or put instructions in the plan for who to get it and let them know, do that so that the property is not lost, so it's not in limbo, and so that the person that you want to care for is able to be cared for immediately. You're still passing on your care, your love for them, even though you're no longer here. That's what this is all about. Okay, so this is a strategy to do that. Make sure that it's done. And then the last factor, so the first one we had about why naming names is so important. We got to name them on our policies. We want to name them on our property. This last one is we want to name their position. Okay, so it may not be that they're getting something, right? They may not be the beneficiary, but they may be the manager of something. Okay, they may be managing something that we leave them to do, and it could be both. Okay, so for instance, I kind of alluded to this when I talked about the client who had the life insurance policy to collect from her parents that had deceased. We had to go to probate court, open up an estate, and so and here in Michigan, the person that manages the estate, right, who like speaks for the estate, is called the personal representative. Okay, that's a legal term. You might also hear something like executor or administrator, but it's basically the main manager of the estate. So because the person is no longer here, this other person steps in for them and makes the decisions on their property. Okay, that's all that does. But you have to name them in a will and a trust. In a trust, it can be a little bit a little bit different. Yeah, it's a little bit different. We have that. There's another name, but you have to name the person who's going to be managing the property, who's going to be managing the estate. So in a will, personal representative, and a trust, there will be a trustee, the manager of the trust property. Okay, and it doesn't matter what the property is, the house, the money, the cars. It could be expensive jewelry that's very valuable, collectible works of art, right? That's a $1 million collection or so. Whoever is going to be managing that, so that then someone can benefit from it. The beneficiaries, the person managing is going to be the person representative or the trustee. Okay, but that's their position. You have to put them in the right position to do that. And another kind of positional management placement is a power of attorney. And we call these positions a lot of times fiduciaries. You might also hear that too. Okay, and that just means that you have an obligation to look after somebody else or to look after their estate, and you can't put your own interest above that. That's what that's all about. Okay, when it comes to a power of attorney, though, name the person. Again, name them, name their exact name. Okay, you can name your relation to them too. My daughter, my granddaughter, my grandson, my son. But name their name. Make sure it's very clear who it is, because power of attorney, they have the power to act for you while you are still alive. All right. So let's say you can't even make the decision of what hospital you want to go to, what medicine you want to take, what money you want to invest. Powers of attorney can do that for you while you are still here. Okay. So that's their role while you're still here. Personal representatives, trustees, that's after you're gone. Okay. Trustee can be while you're still here too, because trustees manage while you're still here. But once you're gone, then they still take over. So they kind of cross it. But the whole point is positions. Name the right people in the right positions to take over your estate, to take over your affairs. Why? Because there's one more position, the beneficiary. Who is going to benefit from it ultimately? Who are you leaving these things to? Why do you want them to have it? What is the thing driving you, right? If it's your children, you want to make sure that even when you're not here, you're still taking care of them, right? If it's your business, you want to make sure that even when you're not here, the business is still running. If it is a charity that you care so much for, you want to make sure that even though you're not here, the charity is still funded. The cause is still funded. It still continues. Okay. That is the significance of naming the right people in the right positions. And I keep saying right right, because you want to definitely make sure, especially when it comes to positions, that these people are able to handle that responsibility that we've been talking about. Okay, and it's not to just be like, lecturing and things like that, but you need to make sure that they're going to be able to carry out your instructions, that they're of a good character. They're not doing it so that they can gain from it. Like I said, that's what the whole fiduciary thing is about. It's not somebody that's looking to elevate in status because that gives them something. No, it's because they are able to manage your things, because they might have their own already. They're not looking for your stuff. Okay, they're not looking to gain from you. And then, some literacy too. You want to make sure that they're able to count well with numbers, right? I mean, because we can talk about millions of dollars. You want to make sure that that person is able, you're not intimidated by handling those millions of dollars. Okay. If it is, when it comes to this area, it could be a lot of legal terminology or business terminology, accounting terminology. Make sure they're comfortable with that, right? And if they're not, you can even, talk about it beforehand and get them the training for it. But you definitely just want to make sure that they're right for that position. Okay, just like any hire, right? There are going to be some qualifications. If you are managing the cash register, you need to know how to count the money, right? If you're going to be editing a book, you need to know how to read and write so that you can make sure everything is in its proper place, right? The grammar is correct. So there are going to be some basic qualifications, but then there's also going to be some character issues. Make sure they're of a clean heart, right? Clean spirit. They're not looking to gain anything unjustly from you, and that they are actually looking out for the next people that you care about. So a lot of times it can be a spouse, because you trust your spouse enough to know that, hey, if I leave something with you, and obviously they're going to be benefiting too, but we have a mutual interest in taking care of the kids, right? Something like that. So you wouldn't expect, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you wouldn't expect like someone to be taking from that next generation. So that's why I just thinking about these things are so important. Talking about them, being honest about what they are, why they are so important. It matters. It matters because, again, let's go back to the beginning. You risk just very nasty family battles. If you're of a prominent position or you have a lot of money and it has to go public, it can be a very nasty court battle. And you just don't want that. I mean, who wants that in their lifetime? You don't want to deal with it. So definitely don't create that situation after you're gone and you can't do anything about it. Okay, so that is today's video, why you need to name names, the importance of naming people in your estate plan. If this has been beneficial to you, please do like, share, subscribe, comment. Let us know what more you would like to see about this. And until then, we will see you again next Thursday, March 21st, Eastern Standard Time, 1:30 p.m. Bye. We'll see you then.